You are about to watch the exact moment Senator John Neely Kennedy completely dismantled Congresswoman Maxine Waters, ending her entire 4-decade political narrative in less than 86 minutes. What would a career politician living behind a 12-foot iron gate know about the actual daily struggles of the working class? 11 seconds of silence. Then the public property records came out. Congresswoman Maxine Waters did not know it yet, but her carefully constructed political brand had exactly 86 minutes left to live. Her communications team would betray her. The property records in his heavy leather binder would end her. The text messages from her own staff would be on every single screen by sundown. Tuesday morning, Dirksen, 538. America was about to watch a progressive icon meet a Southern lawyer who had spent the last 8 months quietly doing the math. If you have been told your whole life that the political establishment is fighting for the working class, you need to hear every single word of this exchange. Subscribe to the channel right now, because the algorithm will try to bury this silence, and the mainstream networks will never show you this clip in its entirety. The hearing room was Dirksen, 538. It was a Tuesday morning, the clock on the mahogany wall reading exactly 9:03 a.m. The air in the room was incredibly heavy, carrying the distinct, suffocating static of political anticipation. 3 C-SPAN cameras were locked into their designated positions. Every single one of the 212 seats in the public gallery was filled. Every seat was taken. The overflow line stretched down the marble hallway, wrapping around the corner toward the elevators filled with lobbyists, progressive housing activists, and junior Democratic staffers hoping to catch a glimpse of the collision. The title of the Joint Special Committee hearing was printed on crisp white placards facing the gallery at the witness table. It read, "Accountability in Urban Housing Grants, a review of federal dispersals." It sounded bureaucratic. It sounded dry. It sounded entirely routine. But the Federal Bureau of Investigation had been looking into this specific grant for 8 months. The Inspector General had impaneled a federal review board in January. By April, every reporter in Washington who covered the housing and urban development beat knew something massive was coming. She had volunteered to appear. Her communications team had pushed her to testify over the desperate objections of her legal counsel. They had told her this would be her ultimate opportunity. They had drilled her on the exact lines that would set the tone for the evening news broadcasts. The witness sitting alone at the dark wooden table was Representative Maxine Waters. The man sitting directly across from her, perched on the elevated dais of the Senate committee, was Senator John Neely Kennedy of Louisiana. They were 2 entirely different species of American politics. Maxine Waters had built a 40-year career on fiery, uncompromising rhetoric. She was the absolute volume of the progressive movement, a politician who commanded rooms by raising her voice, pointing her finger, and demanding that the entire system bend to her will. She was the ultimate political brand of righteous indignation. She was the congresswoman who had gone viral a dozen times for aggressively demanding her time back, shouting down opponents, and leveraging the sheer force of her personality. The Democratic Party had purchased this brand at considerable expense. They had distributed it on every platform their media consultants advised. They had defended it for decades against every single ethics complaint, every financial discrepancy, and every primary challenger. The brand had been a very good brand. The brand was sitting in a witness chair at Dirksen, 538 on Tuesday morning, fully prepared for a televised fight. John Kennedy was the exact opposite. He was a man who moved slowly, spoke softly, and possessed a thick Southern drawl that completely disarmed his opponents right before he intellectually dissected them. He had a brilliant, razor-sharp legal mind hidden behind the carefully cultivated persona of a simple country lawyer. For years, the political establishment had known better than to put these 2 in a room together. They operated in different chambers under different rules. But the numbers had finally forced the issue. A $400 million federal block grant championed exclusively by Congresswoman Waters and designated for emergency urban housing development in South Central Los Angeles had essentially vanished. The money had been appropriated by Congress in the previous fiscal year. The federal treasury had cleared the checks. The funds had been fully dispersed to local Los Angeles agencies. By all official metrics, the program was fully funded, but the houses had not been built. Not a single concrete foundation had been poured. Not a single piece of lumber had been purchased. Not a single nail had been driven. The Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations had spent 8 silent months looking into exactly where the money went, and they wanted to know why the empty dirt lots in South Central Los Angeles were still just empty dirt lots. Congresswoman Waters was not there to apologize. She was not there to gracefully explain administrative delays or supply chain issues or zoning board conflicts. Her communications team, seated in the 2 rows directly behind her, had spent the last 48 hours drafting an opening statement designed to turn the hearing into a massive, aggressive referendum on the American banking system, corporate greed, and systemic inequality. They had drilled her on the specific emotional lines that would set the tone. They had told her this would be her opportunity to completely control the media narrative. She delivered it at 9:07 a.m. She lifted her eyes from her printed opening statement. She looked directly across the dais. She leaned heavily into the microphone. Her voice was loud, echoing off the high ceilings of the Dirksen building. She spoke for 12 uninterrupted minutes. She talked about the historical disenfranchisement of urban communities. She talked about the devastating generational legacy of redlining in Los Angeles. She talked about predatory lending practices by major Wall Street firms that deliberately kept generational wealth out of the hands of minority families. She blamed the federal bureaucracy for stalling the housing funds with unnecessary environmental red tape. She blamed conservative members of the Senate for intentionally trying to sabotage the economic success of her district to score cheap political points. She did not stop there. She demanded that Congress not only ignore the construction delays, but immediately double the original appropriation to $800 million to overcome the institutional barriers that she claimed were entirely to blame for lack of progress. She listed statistics about urban poverty. She listed statistics about the racial wealth gap. She delivered a flawless, passionate, high-volume, progressive sermon that her team had rehearsed for days. When she finished at 9:19 a.m., she sat back in her heavy leather chair. She adjusted her brightly colored blazer. She folded her hands on the desk in front of her and looked up at the panel with an expression of absolute unyielding defiance. A smattering of applause broke out in the back left corner of the gallery from a group of housing activists who had flown in from California on a red-eye flight. 3 volunteers wearing green affordable housing. Now shirts stood up. A reporter from a left-leaning podcast network nodded slowly in agreement. Her communications director, sitting in row 2, gave a tiny, satisfied smile. They had delivered the brand perfectly. The brand was safe. Senator John Kennedy did not respond. He had been at the dais since 8:47 a.m. He had a leather notebook in front of him closed. A single manila folder rested beside it. A thick, heavy, leather-bound binder sat on the floor next to his chair. A silver pen rested perfectly parallel to the folder. He had not looked at his phone. He had not chatted with the subcommittee chairman. He had not smiled. He simply sat there, looking down at the unmarked manila folder. He let the echo of the progressive applause completely die out. He let the room settle into absolute silence. 11 seconds passed. The applause died completely. The housing activists sat back down. The silence stretched so long that a technician in the C-SPAN control booth briefly checked the audio feed to ensure the microphones had not malfunctioned. The room held its breath. The communications director's confident smile slowly faded. Kennedy turned one page of his leather notebook. The page was blank. He turned another, also blank. He used it as a placeholder. Finally, Kennedy reached up and slowly pulled his wire-rimmed glasses down to the bridge of his nose. He looked up. He spoke for the first time in 26 minutes. He leaned forward, bringing his mouth about 4 inches from the microphone. Well, Congresswoman, Kennedy began, his voice drifting through the room like thick molasses. I have sat here and listened to your speech. I have listened very carefully. And I have to say, listening to you explain where this taxpayer money went is a lot like trying to teach a cat how to bark. It takes up a whole lot of time. It makes a terrible amount of noise. And at the end of the day, you still do not have a dog. A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the press row. Two conservative staffers in the second row covered their mouths. Waters immediately leaned forward, her lips parting. The rapid pivot was coming. Her eyes narrowed, her right hand hovering aggressively over her microphone button. But Kennedy did not stop speaking. His cadence was slow, deliberate, and entirely unbothered by her physical posture. He was operating on his own timeline, and he had spent the last 26 minutes counting. You see, ma'am, Kennedy continued, opening the manila folder, we deal in facts up here. The rhetoric is fine for the Sunday morning talk shows. It plays great on the cable news networks. The political theater is a fine brand. But today in this room, we have to do the math. And the math on this $400 million grant is making me nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. You sat there for 12 minutes and told this committee that systemic issues stopped the houses from being built. You blamed Wall Street. You blamed the banks. You blamed historical redlining. But that is not what the Inspector General's report says. The report is right here in front of me. It is 112 pages long. The federal investigation took 8 solid months, and it does not mention the banking system a single time. Waters hit her microphone button. Her voice cracked like a whip across the silent room. Mr. Chairman, reclaiming my time. I will not sit here and be subjected to a condescending lecture from a senator who ignores the fundamental realities of the communities I represent. This is a partisan attack. It is exactly the kind of personal attack on a woman of color that proves my point. It is rooted in prejudice against the urban poor, and I am reclaiming my time. She stopped. Kennedy had not raised his voice. He had not changed his tone, but she had stopped. For 40 years, the Democratic Party had told America that Maxine Waters represented the voice of the unheard. The brand had been a good brand. But the brand was about to discover that the man across the room had the receipts, and he was not going to let her reclaim anything. Kennedy did not look at the committee chairman. He kept his eyes locked perfectly on Waters. He tapped the end of his silver pen against the wooden desk, a slow, rhythmic tapping that cut right through her manufactured outrage. Congresswoman, you are sitting in the United States Senate, Kennedy said softly. We do not have a button for reclaiming your time up here. You are not in the House of Representatives. We only have time for the truth. And the truth is, sitting right here in black and white ink, he picked up a single sheet of paper from the folder. He did not wave it around for the cameras. He held it close to his chest, reading directly from the text of the federal audit. According to the federal audit, of the $400 million allocated for emergency affordable housing in your specific district, exactly $0 have gone to purchasing lumber. $0 have gone to pouring concrete. $0 have gone to laying a single foundation or putting a roof over a single family's head. 0. If you have made it this far into the hearing, hit that like button right now. This is The Silence. The networks will not air tonight. Subscribe before this clip gets buried in the algorithm. The next number is worse than the first one. Kennedy let the word 0 hang in the air for 8 agonizing seconds. The room understood that something had just begun. But I will tell you exactly where the money did go, he continued, turning the page. $280 million, which is exactly 70% of the entire federal grant, was dispersed to a network of 7 community consulting firms and nonprofit advisory boards. These firms were contracted to study the feasibility of housing. They studied it. They had retreats about it. They had catered meetings about it. They printed glossy, full-color brochures about it. I have the expense reports right here in my hand. Kennedy read the numbers with absolute brutal precision. Progressive Urban Strategies, LLC, received $22 million. Equity Action Network received $14 million. They spent $800,000 on a public relations campaign just to announce the grant to the media. They spent $120,000 on an executive retreat in Aspen, Colorado, to brainstorm poverty solutions for South Central Los Angeles. They spent $14,000 on catered lunches from a vegan bistro in Santa Monica. They billed the federal government $500 an hour for diversity consulting on an empty dirt lot. And according to the Federal Registry, which is a matter of public record, 5 of those 7 consulting firms are managed by individuals who served on your previous campaign finance committees. They did not build homes for the poor, Congresswoman. They built bank accounts for your political friends. The room froze completely. The activists in the gallery who had been applauding just 15 minutes earlier suddenly stopped moving. A reporter from the Los Angeles Times stopped taking notes. He sat with his pen suspended above the notebook. The C-SPAN 3 camera executed a slow, agonizingly tight zoom onto Maxine Waters' face. She was not smiling. The righteous defiance had briefly shattered, replaced by a momentary flash of absolute calculation. She knew the rules of political combat better than almost anyone in Washington. When you are backed into a corner with unassailable numbers, you must immediately pivot to raw emotion. You must change the battlefield. That is a gross and intentional mischaracterization of the federal grant process. Waters fired back, the rapid pivot coming exactly as expected. Her volume rose heavily to compensate for the crushing weight of the allegations. Those organizations do vital, essential groundwork. You cannot just drop concrete into a disenfranchised neighborhood without consulting the community leaders, without ensuring equitable distribution of resources. The people of South Central Los Angeles need advocates who understand their struggle, who understand their historical pain. You sit up there in your expensive suit, Senator, but you do not know the people of my district. You do not know what they face every single day. You have no idea what it means to struggle. Kennedy let out another slow, heavy sigh. He did not argue with her. He did not raise his voice. He reached into the inside breast pocket of his suit jacket. He had been carrying a photograph inside that pocket since 7 a.m. He had not shown it to anyone. He had not signaled its existence. He pulled it out and placed it face up on the desk in front of him. I may not live in your district, Congresswoman, Kennedy said quietly, the volume of his voice dropping so low the entire room had to lean forward to hear him. But I do know who lives there. In fact, I invited one of them to join us today. Kennedy lifted his right hand and gestured toward the second row of the public gallery. A black man in his late 50s stood up. He was wearing a faded blue work shirt with the name David stitched in white thread over the left pocket. His hands were heavily calloused, resting nervously on the wooden barrier separating the gallery from the hearing floor. He looked incredibly uncomfortable under the glaring television lights, blinking against the flashes of the press cameras, but he stood tall. A Capitol police officer near the gallery entrance took 2 steps forward and reached for his radio. Kennedy raised his right hand. The officer stopped. The man did not look at the cameras. He looked directly at Maxine Waters. Congresswoman, this is Mr. David Henderson, Kennedy said. His voice had lost all of the folksy Southern humor. It was now razor sharp and entirely serious. Mr. David Henderson. Henderson has lived in South Central Los Angeles for 32 years. He works as an automotive mechanic at an auto parts distribution center on Alameda Street. He works hard. He plays by the rules. He lives exactly 3 blocks from the empty dirt lot where your federally funded housing project was supposed to be built. 2 years ago, when you announced this massive grant on national television, Mr. Henderson was told that the property values in his neighborhood would stabilize. He was told that the new affordable units would lower the crushing cost of living for his children and his community. He believed you. Kennedy turned his head to look directly at the man standing in the gallery. Mr. Henderson, if you would please tell this committee what actually happened to your neighborhood over the last 2 years. David Henderson cleared his throat. He did not have a microphone in front of him, but the pristine acoustics of Dirksen 538 carried his rough, quiet voice perfectly across the room. His voice was steady, but it shook on the consonants. Nothing got built, the man said simply, looking at the ceiling for a moment before looking back down. Not one single brick. But the city reassessed our property taxes based on the promised federal improvements that you announced. My property tax went up $4,200 last year. I had to take a second job working weekends at the warehouse just to keep the house I have owned since 1994. My wife, Sarah, had to go back to work as a cashier. I barely see my grandkids anymore because I am always on the clock. I drive an hour in traffic every single day in a 2011 Ford truck. The crime rate went up because the lot is abandoned. The dirt lot is still just dirt. Only now it has a massive chain link fence around it with a bright, shiny sign that has your name on it, Congresswoman. I am here because she will never come to my house and look my wife in the eye. So I came to hers. He sat down. The room did not move. Kennedy let the silence sit for 4 full seconds. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, Kennedy said. Waters desperately tried to recover the narrative. Mr. Henderson, I am so deeply sorry for what your family has experienced. The economic policies of this country have failed working families for decades. The corporate model of taxation has destroyed. He did not lose his money to a corporation, Congresswoman, Kennedy interrupted. He did not yell, but the absolute authority in his voice stopped her mid-sentence. He lost his money to your press conference. The silence that followed was absolute. It was deafening. It was the kind of silence that physically suffocates the oxygen out of a room. Maxine Waters looked at the man in the gallery for a long moment, then slowly looked down at her desk. For the first time in the entire hearing, her hands were not moving. Her right hand was resting near her water glass. The glass was full. She was not gesturing. She was not demanding her time back. Her communications director, sitting in the row directly behind her, went completely pale. The staffer discreetly pulled out her iPhone and began typing furiously under the desk, the blue light from the screen illuminating her panicked expression. The text message she sent read, "We are losing this. We need an exit strategy." You see the primary problem we have here, Congresswoman, Kennedy said, bringing the attention of the room back to the dais. You sat there and told this committee that you are the ultimate voice of the disenfranchised. You told us that these millions of dollars were absolutely necessary to lift up the working folks of your district. But the working folks in your district, folks exactly like Mr. Henderson, are working 2 brutal jobs just to pay local taxes on an empty dirt lot. Meanwhile, your political consultants are cashing 6-figure federal treasury checks to write 70-page reports about that exact same dirt lot. That is not public service, ma'am. That is a federally funded racket. Waters gripped the edges of the heavy wooden table. Her knuckles turned white. She tried to summon the famous righteous anger that had protected her political brand against every attack for 30 years. The sheer audacity of this committee to bring a single constituent here to deliberately undermine a comprehensive federal initiative is insulting, she said, her voice chanting with forced, desperate outrage. You are weaponizing this man's personal financial struggle to launch a political attack against me. I have spent my entire adult life fighting for the marginalized. I live and breathe the struggles of my community every single day. I am of that community. I know their pain because it is my pain. How dare you sit up there and tell me I do not know the working class? Kennedy closed the manila folder. He did not put it away. He set it back on the table. He reached down to the floor beside his chair and picked up the massive, thick, leather-bound binder he had brought with him. He hoisted it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy, audible thud that made the microphone peak. You live and breathe their struggles, Congresswoman? Kennedy asked. The Southern drawl was entirely gone now. His voice was clinical, precise, and completely cold. Let's talk about where you actually live. He flipped the heavy binder open to a bookmarked page. I have right here the official public property tax records for Los Angeles County. You claim to represent the daily grinding struggles of the inner city. But according to the county registry, your primary residence is a $6.4 million mansion in the highly exclusive gated neighborhood of Hancock Park, zip code 90004. That property is located dozens of miles away from the district you actually represent. Your home features 6 bedrooms and 7 bathrooms. It features a private security perimeter. It features wrought iron gates. It is protected by armed private neighborhood patrols that cost $1,200 a month. You have not actually lived in South Central Los Angeles since 1992. Kennedy looked up from the binder, staring directly and unblinkingly into Waters' eyes. Mr. Henderson is about to lose his family home because of the massive inflation and the property taxes your legislative policies helped create. His dirt lot has a chain link fence. Your mansion has a 12-foot wrought iron gate. Meanwhile, you live in a $6 million fortress perfectly shielded from the very consequences of the votes you cast in Washington. You do not live their struggles. Congresswoman. You commute to their struggles when the television cameras are turned on, and then you drive back to a gated mansion when the cameras turn off. You cannot govern the dangerous streets from behind a security wall. And you certainly cannot ask the hardworking American taxpayer to fund a $400 million illusion. It was the kill shot. It was the absolute unvarnished destruction of a meticulously crafted political narrative, delivered not with shouting, not with childish insults, but with irrefutable public records and the devastated voice of a single constituent. For decades, the Democratic Party had told a generation of voters that they were fighting the billionaires. On a Tuesday morning in a hearing room in the Senate Dirksen building, a senator put a property record on a desk and asked them to look at a mechanic who had to work 2 jobs to pay for a politician's press conference. They did not have an answer. America saw. Maxine Waters did not say a single word. She did not ask to reclaim her time. She did not accuse him of bias. Her right hand moved toward her water glass, but stopped halfway. Her hand held the air 6 inches above the table for a long time. The lapel microphone caught her breathing. The audio of those 43 seconds would be replayed in every documentary and political ad about her career for the next decade. She simply stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched so tight the muscles in her face twitched. Behind her, 3 different legislative staffers, 4 Democratic senators on the committee, quietly reached out and closed their briefing books. A staffer for a California Democrat who had publicly endorsed Waters for re-election began typing on her phone. The text would later be leaked. It read, "We need to walk this back right now. She is finished." They knew it was over. There was absolutely no spinning the visual of a working-class mechanic struggling to pay his taxes while his wealthy representative retreated to a multi-million-dollar estate. The race card had been incinerated. The working-class card had been incinerated. Every shield the brand had constructed for 40 years had been removed in a single moment. The optics were utterly lethal. The political commentary did not need a narrator to deliver it. The narrator only needed to describe what was visible in the room. Kennedy did not gloat. He did not smile. He did not ask another rhetorical question. He slowly and methodically packed his papers back into his brown leather briefcase. He put the manila folder away. He put the heavy binder away. He clicked the heavy brass lock shut. He looked out at the C-SPAN cameras and then out at the packed gallery. The American people are incredibly tired of being treated like they are stupid, Kennedy said quietly, his voice carrying the final weight of a judicial verdict. They are tired of politicians who sell constant outrage to buy luxury mansions. The federal treasury is not a slush fund for political consultants, and poverty is not a brand name you can license for personal profit. One of us builds, Congresswoman, and one of us builds. We are going to audit every single penny of this grant. And if the money is not found and fully accounted for by next Friday, we will be making criminal referrals to the United States Department of Justice. He stood up from his chair. It was 9:58 a.m. It was the first time he had stood since arriving that morning. The chairman of the committee raised the wooden gavel and struck the sounding block, officially bringing the hearing into a recess, but the sound barely registered over the absolute shock in the room. Senator John Kennedy turned away from the desk. He walked out of the double doors at the back of the dais without looking back. He did not speak to the press in the hallway. He did not speak to his security detail. He did not look at his phone. He walked to the Senate subway, got into his waiting vehicle, and went back to his office to do his job. He did not give a single interview that night. He did not appear on any cable program. He did not post on social media. He went home, had dinner with his family, and went to work the next day. Down on the floor of Dirksen 538, the hearing had officially been recessed, but the crushing gravity of what had just transpired kept the room anchored in a stunned, suffocating paralysis. Maxine Waters remained seated at the dark wooden witness table for exactly 6 more minutes. She did not pack up her briefing binders. She did not reach for her glass of water. She simply stared straight ahead at the empty, elevated mahogany dais where Senator John Kennedy had been sitting moments before. Behind her, the massive public gallery began to empty, but not with the usual chaotic, loud chatter of a Washington congressional hearing concluding. It emptied in a hushed, frantic whisper, The distinct sound of 100 people simultaneously realizing they had just witnessed a political execution. The progressive housing activists who had flown across the country on red-eye flights, carrying high-minded ideals and handmade signs, filed out of the heavy oak doors with their heads bowed. They left their brightly colored protest signs shoved under the wooden chairs, abandoned like casualties on a political battlefield. Up in the press gallery, the veteran reporter from the Los Angeles Times slowly closed his leather-bound notebook. He left his silver pen suspended over the blank page for a long moment, realizing that the routine policy story he had prepared to write was dead, replaced by a political obituary he had never anticipated drafting. 2 rows behind the witness table, the communications director sat completely frozen, staring blankly at the glowing screen of her iPhone. Her inbox was already flooding with urgent, demanding requests from CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times, but her fingers hovered uselessly over the keyboard. She realized with absolute terrifying clarity that no drafted statement, no carefully focus group press release, and no strategic spin could ever fix the catastrophic reality of what had just been broadcast live, unedited, and in high definition to millions of American homes. The cascade was no longer just a cascading series of unfortunate political setbacks. It had morphed into an uncontrollable absolute freefall. The cascade was complete. The reckoning had officially breached the heavily fortified containment protocols of the Democratic establishment. For decades, the unwritten rule in progressive politics was absolute solidarity in the face of conservative attacks, but by 11:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the dam broke from the inside, washing away 40 years of established loyalty. The office of Senator Bernie Sanders, the undisputed ideological godfather of the modern progressive movement, released a brief, heavily calculated, and devastatingly sterile 2-paragraph statement. Sent directly to the inbox of every major political reporter on Capitol Hill, the press release spoke in sweeping generic terms regarding the absolute necessity of strict accountability, unflinching oversight, and total transparency in the administration of all federal housing funds. It was a clinical masterpiece of political distancing. The document notably and quite deliberately failed to mention Congresswoman Maxine Waters by name even a single time. The statement was instantly read and universally understood by every seasoned political correspondent and strategist in the city as the fatal blow. It was the exact undeniable moment her closest progressive allies officially cut the tether, sacrificing her to the political wolves to protect the broader ideological movement from the blast radius of her financial scandal. Once the ideological shield was lowered, the sharks in the water immediately smelled blood. By 12:30 p.m., the grinding, unstoppable bureaucratic machinery of the federal executive branch moved in for the absolute kill. The United States Department of Justice, usually fiercely guarded and chronically silent on active political matters, officially confirmed the worst-case scenario. Via a remarkably terse 3-sentence email delivered directly to the White House press pool, the DOJ announced that they were actively reviewing the Inspector General's 112-page report. Furthermore, they confirmed they were already in the preliminary aggressive stages of impaneling a federal grand jury right there in the District of Columbia. The mere mention of a grand jury sent a shockwave through the Capitol complex. It meant federal subpoenas. It meant document preservation orders. The political problem had instantly metamorphosed into an existential legal nightmare. With the legal threat now cemented, the cultural shield protecting her brand completely evaporated. By 2:15 p.m., a major, highly influential left-wing political podcast network, a massive digital platform that had fiercely defended her progressive brand for years against every conceivable conservative attack, suddenly and drastically shifted their entire afternoon programming schedule. The hosts, who just 24 hours earlier would have fiercely defended her legacy, entirely discarded their meticulously planned rundown. Instead, they spent a grueling 45 minutes broadcasting live to millions of loyal listeners about the urgent, undeniable need for a new, younger generation of authentic, uncompromised leadership in Los Angeles. They delivered the most brutal media betrayal possible. They talked about Maxine Waters entirely in the past tense. The final fatal blow did not come from Washington. It came from her own backyard by 3:30 p.m. Pacific time. The final structural pillar of her once invincible political empire completely collapsed. In a frantically scheduled emergency untelevised virtual meeting, the powerful Los Angeles Democratic County Committee convened to address the bleeding. There were no passionate speeches defending her decades of service to the party. They simply held a cold, calculated snap vote to officially and immediately withdraw their long-standing institutional endorsement of her upcoming re-election campaign. The final vote tally was overwhelmingly, brutally against her. The political machine was systematically purging the liability, excising the infected tissue to save the host. By sundown, she was entirely alone. The political vacuum did not even last until dinner. By exactly 4:00 p.m., the vultures had circled and landed. Two younger, highly ambitious local Democratic politicians in Los Angeles marched into the county registrar's office and officially filed the initial binding paperwork to mount aggressive primary challenges against her for the congressional seat. The optics of the challengers were a devastating, precision-engineered counterattack to everything revealed in Dirksen 538. Both challengers were Hispanic, tapping into the rapidly shifting demographic realities of the district. Both were decades younger than her, projecting new energy and a hyper-localized focus. Most importantly, both had actually grown up on the concrete streets of South Central Los Angeles. Neither of them owned a gated mansion. Neither of them had ever set foot inside the exclusive, high-security perimeter of Hancock Park. They had watched the hearing on their phones just like the rest of the country, and their political strategists had instantly recognized the blood in the water. Within hours, both campaigns had launched their rudimentary websites, and both had independently landed on the exact same lethal campaign slogan. Printed in bold, uncompromising letters across their digital banners were the words, "A representative who actually lives here, miles away from the frantic, collapsing war rooms of Washington, D.C." David Henderson wanted absolutely nothing to do with the earthquake he had just triggered. By 6:00 p.m., as the cable news networks devoted their entire primetime lineups to analyzing his 3 minutes of testimony, his phone began ringing endlessly with requests from national booking producers. Fox News offered prime time, CNN offered exclusive sit-downs. He declined every single one of them. He did not care about the viral fame, the YouTube view counts, or the partisan warfare. He simply walked out of the Dirksen building, buttoned his jacket against the evening chill, and walked down Massachusetts Avenue toward Union Station to catch his train back to reality. A small, persistent local Los Angeles reporter eventually tracked him down later that week, catching him in the dusty, oil-stained parking lot of the auto parts warehouse on Alameda Street. The reporter shoved a microphone toward him, asking how it felt to single-handedly destroy a political titan. Henderson stopped, resting his calloused hand on the door handle of his battered 2011 Ford truck. He looked directly into the camera, his expression completely devoid of triumph or vindictiveness. "I didn't destroy anyone," he said simply, his rough voice carrying the exhausted weight of the working class. "I just told the truth. I just want my neighborhood back." He turned away from the flash of the camera, pulled open the heavy metal door of the warehouse, and walked inside. Then, the man who had just dismantled a $400 million political machine walked to the punch clock, slid his card into the slot, and clocked in for his second shift. He did not appear in the news again. Maxine Waters was eventually escorted out the heavily guarded back entrance of the Dirksen Senate office building by a detail of Capitol Police, a stark, humiliating departure for a politician who had spent 4 decades thriving in front of the television cameras. Usually, she would proudly march out the front doors of the Capitol, flanked by a dozen loyal aides, delivering fiery, defiant sound bites to the waiting media. Not today. Today, she was quietly routed through the basement corridors, past the underground loading docks and utility elevators, desperate to avoid the massive, frantic press pool waiting in the main marble hallway. The echoing shouts of reporters demanding answers, demanding to know about the $6 million mansion and the missing $400 million federal grant could still be heard faintly echoing through the thick oak doors. She did not stop walking. She did not answer any questions. She did not look at any cameras. Once she stepped inside the waiting tinted window SUV, the silence was absolute. She did not release a single statement on social media. Her Twitter account, usually a relentless daily canon of progressive outrage and political demands, went completely and inexplicably dark for 48 consecutive hours. There were no press releases sent out from her communications director. There were no defensive interviews booked on friendly primetime cable news shows. Her political allies did not rush to the microphones to defend her honor. For the very first time in 40 years, the absolute loudest, most unapologetic voice in progressive American politics had absolutely nothing to say. The machinery of her outrage had finally run out of fuel. The brand had finally met the truth. For years, the political establishment had carefully constructed a narrative, insulating her from criticism with accusations of bias and weaponized identity politics. But that towering narrative had just shattered, violently and irreversibly, against the cold, hard, unforgiving reality of public property records and the tearful testimony of a constituent she had abandoned. The truth had walked into Dirksen 538, carrying a leather binder and a simple photograph, and it had won the war without ever once needing to raise its voice. Senator John Kennedy did not need to scream to destroy a 40-year facade. He only needed to read the receipts. If you just watched a quiet, methodical senator completely dismantle a corrupt, hypocritical political brand with nothing more than a single photograph of a working man and a county property tax record, hit that like button right now. Do it so the algorithm cannot suppress what happened here today. Comment Henderson down below in the comments section to show your unwavering support for the actual working class citizens of this country, the mechanics, the warehouse workers, the cashiers who bear the real crushing financial cost of these broken political promises. Comment truth if you are finally ready to see more politicians demand actual unvarnished accountability from the elites who rule over us. Share this video immediately with every single person in your life who still falsely believes that the Washington establishment is looking out for their best interests. The full transcript of this hearing is officially on the public record, but what you just witnessed with your own eyes will be written into the history books as the moment the progressive facade collapsed. The hearing is over, but the reckoning for the political elites has only just begun. Make sure your channel notifications are turned on right now because we will be tracking the Department of Justice criminal investigation, the federal grand jury subpoenas, and the campaign finance audits every single step of the way. The truth is finally out. They cannot hide it anymore. The brand is finished. The reckoning is here.